Well, hello and good evening to you all, and thank you very much for joining me for yet another of our dinners for the Steeple Times. And tonight we have the pleasure of Geoffrey Wansell, a fabulous author, biographer, television presenter. You've done many different things, haven't you? Maybe you could give a little introduction to your career and how you started in true crime and the famous faces of Hollywood.
I'll try and do it very simply, providing you can hear. Put your hand up if I'm not loud enough, okay? I've done a lot of theatre recently, and I know that some people, especially in the upper circle, can't hear a bloody word. You're still in the stalls, okay. I started as a hack. I always wanted to be a hack. And I went to the LSE and I left, and I wanted to try and get a job in journalism, so I answered an ad when the Times still had personal ads on the front page. Tells you how long ago that was. It said trainee wanted for Educational Weekly, and I had been everywhere. I tried to get a job everywhere, and it turned out to be the Times Educational Supplement. This is the first days of 1967, a long time ago, but not to you, sir. But and I answered this ad and I got the job. I think I got the job. I didn't go to Oxbridge. I went to the LSE. So I think the editor, who only hired the old-fashioned Indian civil service method, which was to hire Oxbridge firsts. I wasn't an Oxbridge first, but he was vaguely aware that the world in 1967 was changing. He didn't quite know how, but it was. And so he hired me, and I was absolutely not, I didn't fit in at all. But I did manage to change them a bit. And we talked about all sorts of things, and I got a column and I became news editor. And then in 1970 I moved to the Times. Can you still hear down the back?
Yes.
Well done. In 1970 I moved to the Times as a home news reporter. I was the youngest for quite some time. And I was there and I loved it. It was great fun, great training. But my favourite story is William Rees-Mogg was then the editor. Lord Rees-Mogg, father of James. Jacob. Or William. No, James is the son, isn't he? William's the father. Jacob, sorry. So I got a note at Christmas. Dear, I'm very pleased to give you your bonus for Christmas. And I wrote back saying, well, as I've been here 18 months, could I meet you now? Because we poor reporters were never allowed to reach the elevated heights of speaking to the editor. Which amused him hugely. So I was invited to see William, and I became a feature writer, the first ever feature writer at the Times. And then, well, I did all sorts of other things. I went to LBC when it started. I was the first controller.
What were your topics to begin with?
I did everything.
You were involved
the great job of anyone who does what I do, whether you're a biographer, whatever you are, is do everything. Learn the trade. Learn how to do it. Meet everyone. Just get lots and lots of experience. There's absolutely nothing else I would recommend. Just go out there and do it. People come to me often and say, "Oh, I'd really like to do what you do," and I say, "I don't think you would. It's bloody awful. I've never made any money. I'm sheltered housing, and I've had a fantastic career. So what are you going to say?" Mind you, 2 divorces didn't help, but there you go. That's another issue.
So the variety of your career, you began at the Times, and then how did you end up writing Cary Grant's biography?
Because I went to the Observer, and when Donald Trump was still the editor, and I did a column called Pendennis on the Observer. And one day, someone rang me up. I think it was someone from Fabergé. Rang me up and said, "Would you like to interview Cary Grant?" I said, "I don't think there's a person on the planet who wouldn't want to interview Cary Grant." So I'm given this very odd advice. Go to this address. It's behind the Hilton, in sort of near Shepherd's Market, and ring the doorbell and ask for Judy.
The infamous Shepherd's Market, where all sorts of things have gone on. Yeah.
So I duly ring the doorbell. It's a very bright February morning in 1978. I ring the doorbell, and this unmistakable voice. I mean, Cary Grant had many qualities, but his voice was unmistakable. And he says, yes. And I said, well, I've got to ask for Judy. And he says, yes, come up. So I go up, and it's the day in which the death of Mae West. Hands up those of you who remember Mae West. Oh, one or two anyway. Yeah, okay. Mae West was a great star in the very early days of the movies. And I say to him, oh, and he says, would you like tea? I thank you, no. Coffee? No. Oh, you must be very sad about Mae West's death. And he says, did you have trouble getting here? And I said, well, no, actually, but I mean, she died over. Yes. That's a nice jacket. I mean, he would not talk about anything except when I said to him, well, I was always very interested in the music hall, and you may remember, it doesn't matter if you don't, he started life as a stilt walker in a music hall troupe in Bristol. And that he really liked talking about. And I left this extraordinary interview, and I walked out into the street, and I thought, I've never read anything about the man I've just met that even got close to trying to describe who this man was. So I went away, and I talked to my then agent, and I said, I'd really like to do a book about Cary Grant. And okay, so then I did the right thing. I wrote to him, dear Mr. Grant, I'd like to write a book. I get a letter from his then lawyer stroke agent saying, oh no, Cary doesn't want a book written about him. I said, okay, I quite understand, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to come to LA, and I'm going to stay there. And so I go to LA. I had a 18-month-old son, and I had to swap houses because I had no money. We go there, and I say to him, and he rings me up. Oh, gee, no, you're only going to write this because you think I'm going to die. I said, no, actually, Mr. Grant, I think you can live as long as your mother, and she lived till 93.
And how old was he at this point?
Oh, in his 70s. I said, oh, okay. But we had this very odd relationship. And in the end, he used to ring me and say, well, I've told Jimmy Stewart and talk to you, Nobody's talked to him before about me. I said, well, I remember Philadelphia Story? Of course you do. Okay, well, so I do the book, which he actually apparently quite liked, although it didn't paint him as a particularly nice man, because actually he was a miserable old sod. My favourite story, which is not in the book, I've got several favourite Cary Grant stories. One of them I like particularly. He had a girlfriend. He had girlfriends, although he was not entirely straight. How could I do that? He lived with Randolph Scott for 10 years, and they both left on the same year, and both married very rich women. Randolph Scott married a very rich Texan, and Cary, of course, married Barbara Hutton. They didn't leave for just the jokes. They left for the money. That famous remark about Cary Grant and Barbara Hutton, cash and carry. Anyway, I located one of his later girlfriends, and she said, an English girl had gone to work in Hollywood, and she said, I said, why did you leave Cary? He said, well, she said, it's very simple. Cary Grant doesn't go to the supermarket, so that means that I have to go to the supermarket. Can you still hear me down the back?
Very well, yes.
You sure?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Cary Grant doesn't go to the supermarket, so she has to go to the supermarket. He's living in the house that Howard Hughes gave him as a present because he used to procure girls for Howard. He's living in this house. Sorry?
Well, Howard Hughes and him, yes. They say never meet your hero, but was Cary Grant a hero to you, or
no?
Or he was just a very difficult
He
man.
was, you know, he
Because
was
Howard Hughes, of course, was an extremely
he was an
difficult man.
extraordinary man. So Maureen, the girlfriend, says, well, I came back from the supermarket, Vons, just down the hill from, and there was Cary in the kitchen screwing the Mexican gardener on the kitchen table. And she said, oh, I think I might draw the line now.
And that was the end of that.
Well, it was for her.
Yes.
It wasn't the end of the book. And it's not in the book. But because at that point he was very sensitive about all that. And indeed he remained sensitive about it till the end of his life. Because movie heroes in those days weren't gay. They were, you know, and he was desired by women around the world, literally. Well, they were, but they weren't, as you quite rightly say.
The Mexican gardener was female.
No, the Mexican gardener was male, dear.
So when you'd finished your book, did your relationship, friendship with your correspondence with him continue? Or?
Yes, he did. He kept in touch, but you remember he died quite not that long after. In that rather strange way, he was on doing an evening with Cary Grant tour, and he expired in the theatre just before he was about to go on. So you deal with people like that. It's incredibly illuminating.
And from that position, did you then become somebody who was favoured by the theatrical film world, or did you then have to go into a different kind of...
Matthew, if you're a hack, you're never favoured by anybody.
Yes. Yep.
You're loathed universally by everyone, because you're always going to make their life difficult, or you're going to ask them impossible questions, which I actually rather like. I mean, if you're a natural maverick, it suits. But no, I've never. I mean, I did after I'd done Cary, and then I did a book on Jimmy Goldsmith, and then.
So what got you into Jimmy Goldsmith? Because it's a totally different world, totally different country.
I went to work for him. I left the Observer to go and work for a magazine he started in 1979 called Now, before your time, dear, and it only lasted 19 months. But I went to do a column and various other things. And Jimmy was this extraordinary character, became very, very controversial because of Private Eye and the whole Golden Balls
and
thing.
The Lord Lucan thing.
Lord Lucan. We can do Lord Lucan if you want, but it's a whole...
No, that's a different That's a
20-minute diatribe.
Yes.
But Jimmy was this extraordinary character, and I thought it's the same I thought about Grant. No one's ever told the story. And I wanted to do it, and I wrote to him and said, I'm going to write a book about you. Same thing. No, don't do it. I said, no, I'm going to do it. I'll send you the manuscript bit by bit. If there's mistakes, factual mistakes, I'll change them, but you can't change my opinions. So I did that book. Actually, it was controversial at the time. And then I did another book about Goldsmith about 5 years later, when he'd made even more money. And he was an extraordinary man. I mean, in many ways, as I think someone said recently in the Telegraph, he and his brother created the Greens and Reform.
Yes, the referendum party.
The referendum party gave birth to Reform, and
the Green movement is very much what his son...
Teddy created the beginnings of the Green Party.
Ben Goldsmith, of course, is very into rewilding, and Zach Goldsmith was very much into the Green movement and the Conservative Party.
He was a great friend of Goldsmith.
Oh, sorry, yeah?
He was a great friend of Goldsmith.
Oh, were you?
And knew him. Great friend. I was far too young, but I didn't know him.
Okay.
And I went to lunch with him a few times.
Great. Where?
Anywhere in London.
Okay, Wilton's,
No.
the house, Paris.
Berkeley Square.
Okay.
Annabelle's.
Yeah.
The Claremont Club.
Years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Well, all of this is years ago, dear.
So next, you somehow ended up dealing a lot with true crime cases.
Okay.
So true crime cases, obviously you have one major case. Was that the first case
I tell the story as best I can. I was doing a second Cary Grant book, a picture book, for Bloomsbury and for Arcade in America. And I'm in LA, and my agent then, the late and lamented River Scott, I don't know if any of you ever knew him, his brother was the racing correspondent of the Telegraph. And he rang me up and he said, they want someone to do a biography of Frederick West, the Gloucester serial killer. Fred had just killed himself in Winson Green. And I said, well, I've never done that sort of thing before. But I just had rather a well-received biography of Terence Rattigan, the playwright. And they said, well, they think you're very respectable. Would you like to do an outline? We'll do an outline. So I said, okay. And is it still all right down the back, or have I lost you?
Yes.
I've lost you.
You might want to move forward a bit.
We're okay. We can't move much forward.
I know I'm being boring, but I won't go on much longer. No, this only does it for him. It doesn't do it for the PA. There's no PA. So I say this is ridiculous. He said, do you want to do an outline? So I do an outline. It's the worst outline I've ever written. It's disgraceful. Because I knew nothing about it. I didn't know West. I'd never been to Gloucester and nothing. So I write this disgraceful outline. And I think, oh, no. I get back, and my agent rings me up and says, they want you to do it. I said, you must be joking. It's awful. And they said, no, they want you to do it. So I was hired by the official solicitor to the Supreme Court, who's going to give me all the papers. That means Fred's interviews, Rose's interviews, all the witness statements, Fred's diaries, Fred's prison diaries, everything.
And you were literally taken, I believe, into a room and locked in the room.
Yeah, I'm getting to that. Yes. I'll get there. So I have to sign about 700 non-disclosure agreements because they don't want me to prejudice Rose's trial, which hadn't then taken place. We're talking about the early autumn of 1995. So, Rose's trial starts. I hadn't been part of the West paraphernalia. There was a huge team, a round-the-world team. The media hacks were all over it like a rash. I mean, it was hundreds of them. And anyway, I turn up, and I didn't know anything about it. And so I thought, okay. And then on the first Saturday of Rose's trial, I'm told to go to London to a solicitor's office that I can't disclose because we mustn't, prejudice the trial. And you'll meet a man, and this is his name. I said, okay. So I turn up this very sleek solicitor's office overlooking the Thames. Everything is polished wood and everything. And this little man comes to me. He was a sweet little Pakistani man. And he says, oh yes, follow me. So we go through all these wonderful chrome and huge expensive art and everything. And we get to this door, and it's got K on it. And he said, oh, this is where we're going to be. This is room K. If you like Kafka, okay, keep up at the back, yeah. You like, okay. So he says, well, and I go in, and there's nothing there except a table, not much bigger than this one, a telephone, and a huge filing cabinet. Not one with drawers, one with two big doors.
Don't they lock you in?
I'm getting there.
I'm interrupting. Sorry.
So there's a huge cabinet with two doors, and he says, "Well, here's a cassette recorder, and you can't make any notes, and you can't take anything out, and I have to lock you in. And when you want to leave, you ring whatever it is, 3681 or whatever." And I said, "Oh, okay," and he leaves and locks the door. So I think, well, what am I going to do now? So I go to the giant filing cabinet and I open the doors, and it's a complete jumble. Cassette tapes, files with interviews. It's just a complete mess. But in the middle, on the middle shelf, is a small cardboard box about that by that by that. I thought, well, I start somewhere. So I take the cardboard box out and I put it on the table and I open it. And it contains all Frederick West's clothes, right down to his underpants, his socks, not his shoes, you'll be interested to know, because they'd taken them away at Winston Green. But everything else, because it was, the official solicitor was his executor. So everything had to go back to the official solicitor, and this was his. So at that point, I think your life changes. You don't know it, but it does. And so from almost, not quite from that day onwards, but it changed my life. I mean, I did the book. I think it was a good book. I'm very proud of it. But it asks a very interesting question, and you must talk about this yourselves. One of the things I decided was that West was an absolutely horrible man. Depraved, there's no question about any of that.
How many victims do you believe there to be? Because obviously there were, was it 12 or 13?
12.
12 he was convicted
Well,
of.
yeah, 12.
But how many do you actually
Well, he was
believe?
never convicted.
Sorry, how many was
Rose was convicted of 10. I mean, apart from Mary Bastholme, who was supposedly the 13th victim, I've never believed that he killed less than 60.
60 people.
I've said it many
So
times.
that puts him up there in the league of Harold Shipman.
6-0. Yeah. But he buried them all over Gloucestershire. I remember having a conversation with the detective superintendent, who was theoretically the senior investigating officer, and he said, we can't go around digging up all of Gloucestershire. And I said, no, I quite agree.
And many of those victims would be a bit like with, for example, Dennis Nielsen. They would be homeless people, runaway people,
Some
people who could easily be forgotten about.
They could all easily be missed, Matthew.
But also the way he treated people around them, the way he treated his own children, he traumatized them for life, the way he treated his own wife, the many women he raped, so even apart from the victims he killed.
Yes. And what contact, Geoffrey, did you have with members of his family?
Well, I saw Stephen May. I wrote the book partly. I shared the proceeds from the book with the 5 children were given a new life, and that was one of the deals, part of the deal. And so I Rose wouldn't speak to anybody at that time. Fred was dead. Stephen, the son, Heather was killed. Stephen would, May would, but.
Didn't Stephen the son have troubles of his own?
Yeah, I mean, he committed similar crimes to his father.
And and Fred West's father himself had been involved in similar crimes, and his brother.
Well, John West was his brother. He was a dustbin man in Gloucester.
And they had an incestuous relationship with their sister, and they were taken to court. But of course, the sister would not talk.
No, it wasn't not quite the sister.
No,
the first Anne Marie, who was Fred's first child, was used by Fred as a way of enticing his daughters, and Anne Marie was what Fred used to call broken in. It was a horrible phrase, and I'm not saying it anything with any joy. And Fred and Rose did dreadful things to Anne Marie, which ruined her. She's still with us, but in a terrible state. And there was nothing about Fred that you could possibly say there was no rehabilitation possible. But I made a decision about the book, which was that I wasn't going to glamorise him. I wasn't going to take all the dirty bits out. I wasn't going to extract the detail. So because if I did that, he would just say, "Oh, just a naughty boy."
And you found that he was somebody who was very good at charming people. I think you said he could charm the birds off the trees.
He could.
But he had this creepy system. You managed to go inside the house, rather like my friend Martin Brunt.
Yeah.
And you said the house was very creepy. There was some system in the cellar that you witnessed, perhaps?
No, the house. I mean, the one thing that probably made the jury in the Rose West trial utterly convinced that Rose was guilty of sin was the house. The defence tried very hard to prevent the jury ever seeing the house, which you can quite understand, because once you went to the house, and I was lucky enough to see it before they knocked it down, and I was there when they knocked it down, it was so small you could not possibly have not known what was going on in the house. And that was in the end what brought Fred to the attention of the authorities, because the kids outside playing in the street, a policeman on a bicycle, it's almost old-fashioned, and they stopped the policeman and said, what will you do if your friend, and they pointed at one of Fred's daughters, was being, how can I put it, abused, we would now call it. He said, well, that's dreadful. And, well, they said, yeah, what's happening, you know. And so that was the way in which that whole house of cards...
That was the trigger of the
apart.
investigation.
That was how it fell apart. Because in the end, the children, because they all knew, the whole joke about Fred was, they used to have, you know, they were quite a close family in lots of ways. And they used to have supper, though Fred would never... he used to take all his clothes off and wear his underpants, and he was incredibly dirty. And they used to sit round the table, and they say, and if there was any argument or jokes, they say you want to watch out, because otherwise you're going to end up
under the patio,
like Heather.
Yes.
3 down and 2 across.
Wasn't there a victim's mother who turned up, and Rose West was wearing her slippers?
The slippers, yes, and her cardigan was on the line, and she said, she left them behind.
Yes.
But
Myra Hindley, Rose West, she had a relationship with Myra Hindley, that's why I'm thinking of it.
Yes.
So have you had any correspondence with her in prison?
No, Rose wanted to talk to my dear friend Brian Masters.
Yes.
Brian
Masters is another biographer.
Who wrote a book saying she was innocent. Now, Brian and I have disagreed about this for years, so it doesn't matter, I'm not in any way. Anyway, Rose sent Brian a visiting order and then rescinded it. The prison service and the Home Office rescinded it at the last minute because they didn't want Rose, who's incidentally recently changed her name to Jennifer Jones.
That was last year, 2 years ago, 2024.
24, yeah. Well done.
Yes. But with regard to Rose West, do you actually believe that Fred West killed himself so he could try and clear her name?
Well,
because
I think
that was the strategy that some people have suggested.
I think that's what he thought at the beginning, but in the end, I think he just didn't want to face justice. No more than his brother John. His brother John, it was at Bristol Crown Court, and John had been on trial for 4 days on sexual abuse charges, Anne-Marie and among others. And we went home on the Thursday. The jury would go out on the Friday. And the PA man in Bristol, lovely man, rang me up at about 10 o'clock and said, John's killed himself. And he killed himself in exactly the same way as Fred West. The same knot, the same short...
Like father, like son.
Absolutely. And, well...
So could you remind us of what that was? I can't remember how he killed himself.
Well,
the young lady over there can't either.
Well, let's put it this way. What he did, ma'am, I'll try and explain it very simply. Fred was a very adept at grooming people. And what he did was essentially, when he got to Winson Green, he volunteered to look after, mend shirts. Oh, if there's a rip or a tear and all that. And so what he did was he got all these shirts and he very carefully stitched together a whole series of bits of shirt to make the beginnings of the knot, and then he stitched together bits of the blanket on his bed to make the noose. He put it into the ventilation grill above the door, hooked it into there, and even more clever, he didn't want to put the chair under his feet, because that would have attracted the wardens, the prison,
noise, yes.
the prison
So
officers.
he was clever.
So he stood on a sack of shirts and kicked it away. And his brother John did almost exactly the same in his garage in Gloucester. I think I've lost them at the back again. They're
So basically what you're saying, he was talking about suicide many years before.
Of course, he didn't want to face justice.
He did not want to go to face.
Many years before he even did the murders, or what?
No, it was after the murders, or at least during the murders.
So
Sorry, let's go on.
With regard to Rose West, maybe you could talk a little bit about what she's doing now, how she had a relationship with Myra Hindley.
Yeah, she's had a series of relationships in jail. She's a very persuasive and commanding woman in lots of ways. She had a relationship with Myra, which didn't last very long. And then she has a relationship with the mother of baby P. Do you remember baby P? That didn't last very long.
And doesn't she love Strictly Come Dancing?
She does.
Dancing on Ice, Bake Off.
All of the
She's
above.
got a rowing machine.
Yes. She has
And
a,
if she's accepted, she'll never be released. The legend.
no, she will never be released. But the one I think that's
She's
interest-
accepted that.
Yeah, the one I like is interesting. Is the most forgotten prisoner in British jails is a lady murderer called Maria Pearson, who has been in jail for longer than Myra Hindley for one murder. It's another story, not tonight, but it's a fascinating.
Well, maybe
story.
that's a story for over dinner. But maybe some of the guests might have some questions for you now, and then we can have something to eat. Have we any
Question.
a question? Right.
Oh,
Yes. So you have written, about biographies of famous people, as well as stories of criminals. So which one was more difficult to tell truthfully? Was it about the people who were protected by glamour, like famous people, or was it about people who were considered to be monsters by public?
everybody has secrets. There's no doubt about that. And people who say they don't are lying. Everybody has secrets, and one of the things that biographers have to deal with is the nature of the secrets. And I'll give you a Jimmy Goldsmith example. I decided to do the first book, and I'm sitting at home, and Annabel Goldsmith rings me up. I've never spoken to Annabel in my life, and she said, "I must come round to see you at once." And I say, "Okay, well, fine. I'm living in a house in Shepherd's Bush. She's still living in Ormley, that wonderful house on Ham Common." And she says, she arrives, says, "What are you going to do about the woman in Paris?" I say, What woman in Paris?" She says, "You must know about the woman in Paris." I've got absolutely no idea about the woman. Absolutely not.
Well, the famous line is, "When you marry your mistress, you
create a job
vacancy."
vacancy. And Laura Boulet de la Meurthe, who I came to know quite well actually, and Annabel said, "Well, you've got to say something about her." So I say, "Okay, I'll ask Jimmy." So I say to Jimmy, at some point, this is an answer to your question as best I can. I say, "What do you want me to say about the woman in Paris?" And he says, "You can say what you like." So I said, "Well, perhaps you could tell me a few details." So he proceeds to explain. The story goes on. This goes on, and I go to Paris one time to see him, and he's going to see Law's parents for the very first time. Can you imagine how that is? He's a very, very rich man. This is his mistress. He's married Annabel, and he's going to see Law's parents for the first time. And he says, "I've got a helicopter." Well, of course, he said, "But I'm keeping it all weekend in case they don't like me and I need to leave quickly." Everybody has secrets.
So, have we any more questions?
Yes.
Do.
Michael?
Do.
I met Cary Grant in Monte Carlo
Yeah.
years ago. He was introduced to me by Princess Grace.
Okay. Well, they made a movie together.
Sorry?
They made a movie
I
together.
know that. He was was a very nice man. I didn't spend much time. It was actually at the circus. It's interesting you talk about Steeples because I met him at the Monte Carlo Circus Festival, which
Yes.
is every year.
Yeah.
And he comes especially for the circus. So now I know why he comes for the circus.
Indeed.
To see the Steeples. What did he have anything to say about Princess Grace? I produced the shows in Monte Carlo for the SBM, Prince Rainier's company for 2 years, so I was there quite a lot in those days. And I met Cary Grant on 2 occasions. I didn't have any obviously, conversation with him. But what did he say? Did he have any comments when you interviewed him about Princess Grace?
I'm sorry, sir.
So to sum up the question, did Cary Grant have any comments to make about Princess Grace? And
Not really. I mean, I think he liked her. I think. I mean,
To be very good friends.
I think they were good friends. Remember, Princess Grace was almost as how can I put it, highly motivated sexually as he was for men. She was not a how can I put it, a shrinking violet. In any way, so sorry, dear. Oh, do you want more criminals?
We're currently on the Cary Grant.
Hang on.
And Princess,
Why? I thought we were talking about criminology,
a mixed.
and we were talking about Cary Grant. Was he a criminal?
Not that I'm aware of, dear.
Yes. Geoffrey wrote a biography of.
No, I understand that. I'm not denying your question, but
Right.
why
not
is
suggesting
Cary
Cary
Grant
Grant
mixed up with criminology?
Well, he's not mixed up. It's just I happened to write a book about him.
I understand that.
Right.
How do we mixing up?
Clear that up or not?
Yes, I think we have. Yes.
That's all right.
Well,
Shall we have another question, Tenzin?
I'm afraid it wasn't me that
Tenzin, do
mixed
you have
them
a
up.
question?
I understand that. Yeah.
It's because he was living a lie, that's why. We're talking about lies, truths and lies.
Well, lots of people.
You a question?
If you'll forgive me, ma'am, lots of people are living a lie. There's awful lot of it about.
I can ask one more. I mean, continue.
So, should we shut up now?
Right. Okay. Well, we'll have one more. We'll have one more question. Have we one more question, Claire? Claire Rubens?
No, they're all down that end. They're on their own.
You had a question.
Oh no, but maybe somebody else was just
He has a
There is
question.
a sensible question here.
Yes.
Ma'am.
So you have discussed Cary Grant, but what then brought you into writing about murder?
Because I wrote a book about Frederick West. Really, because I wrote a book about Frederick West, and I couldn't escape it. Once you've done that, I just got more and more. The reason I do so many documentaries is because I've done so many. It just becomes it just rolls on so fast you can't stop it. Although I think, and you very sweetly asked me earlier, how do you deal with it? Because it is. I have a podcast about true crime. I've made 400 hours of television about true crime. I've made many series.
So which medium do you enjoy the most? Do you like doing the Murders by the Sea television type programs, or do you like your podcasts about? Because you do a podcast with your daughter. It's very, very good.
I think it's great fun.
Blood Ties, which is fantastic.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
I'm so sorry, sir.
We've been talking about, I thought, crime. And all anybody been talking about Cary bloody Grant. Was he a criminal? No. So why are we talking about it?
Because he wrote a book about it.
Well, it must have been.
No, but when we were here talking about crime. That's what I thought.
It must have been a very good lunch.
Have I gone wrong? I thought we were talking about the books you wrote about.
Anyway,
crime.
so
Not about Cary bloody Grant, who I'm sure is a very nice man.
I'm sorry, I didn't realise we had.
Don't worry.
I would have.
No, don't be silly.
His
Ask
experiences
the question. Why are we talking about?
Okay, well, I
That's
think
my question. Why are we talking about
I think at this juncture we
It's
may
time for
decide
supper.
to have dinner. I think. Thank you very much for all your questions. Thank you.
Sorry.